Hi, and welcome to the special edition of The Right Stuff. I'm the Queen Parker J. Thank you so much for joining me. This edition of The Right Stuff is completely different because we are going to be showcasing five authors from the Life Anthology presented by Doorway Publishing. You may be wondering, what in the world are you talking about, Parker? Why is it such a big deal? I tell you why it's a big deal, because we are going to use this anthology to celebrate life. And these authors with me are right on point as we talk about why it is important to be celebratory and appreciative of life. And we're going to talk about it in really unique ways. I can't wait to tell you all about it. As always, we want to thank our corporate sponsor for their support, Christian Book Club. To find out how they can help you build your readership, go to christianbookclub.net. We also want to thank our Patreon team for their support. To find out how you can help out with our mission as we showcase Christian authors worldwide, go to patreon.com/rightstuff and see how you can help out. And as always, we covet your prayers. And so, without further ado, I'm going to introduce my guests today. I have Jackie Jeline, Jess Hannah, Sarah Bowen, J.L. Patterson, and Christopher Weeks. Gang, how you doing today?
Awesome. Thank you for having us.
Very good. Thank you.
Thanks so much for having us.
And I am excited to have you guys with me. You already know how I felt about your stories in this anthology. We're going to go deep down and dirty into this anthology. So before I begin, I have to introduce our publisher, Jackie Jeline from Doorway Publishing. Jackie, go ahead and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hi. I don't know how to really begin, but I will at least talk about how the anthology came to be with Doorway. For those of you who are familiar with the Crossover Alliance, I would be remiss if I didn't give a shout out to my good friend David Alderman, who I worked very closely with through the Crossover Alliance for many years. And it was through that the Life Anthology actually found its birth. They would publish anthologies like every year, every couple of years. And it was through that the process for the anthology began. And I was a little bit a part of that, but it was still in the beginning process. So it had only went to the acquisition editors at that time. And so most of our stories were already accepted through the Crossover Alliance. I know mine was everybody else's already with the Crossover, because we did have a few additions. So a lot of us were already. Not. Oh, you were not. Okay, you came. No. Yeah, okay. That's so we did. Yeah, because we got some people in afterwards, either through recommendation. I know JL, he had recommended some people, and so we did get additional submissions after the fact. But through the Crossover, we began that process. But then the sad news came was that the Crossover Alliance had closed their doors. And so a few of us had decided to kind of do our own thing. And it was through that Doorway was kind of born. It was already kind of in the process, but then I think that just kind of escalated that process. And through that, I just was so excited about this anthology that I didn't want to let it die. So I went to David, and he so generously and so graciously gave it over to me to publish through Doorway. And I'll always be grateful for that, because it was just, even at that time, I hadn't had a chance to look at all the stories, but looking at it, it was really a gift. So that's how it all began with the Life Anthology, and that's how I got my hands on it.
What I love about the Crossover Alliance is the fact that they always have published provocative fiction for Christian worldview. And I love it. And I was so sad when they closed their doors, but in closing their doors, they opened up a window, which is Doorway Publishing. And you were able to take this rather provocative anthology and publish it for the masses. So for those of you who are listening to me, if you want to get your copy of Life and Anthology, you can go online to Amazon.com and purchase your copy today. It's very exciting. It's a wonderful collection of stories that I know you're going to enjoy from various genres, all talking about life. So it brings me to my next question here, Jackie, as you are the spearhead of this particular anthology. What made you, as part of being a Crossover Alliance and going over to Doorway Publishing, why was this anthology so important to be released to the masses?
Well, I loved all the topics that we did the anthologies on, and as a team we always made those decisions together. But when this idea was, I don't even remember exactly who first suggested this. It might have even been gee, I'm not even sure. It might have been David. I can't even remember who suggested it. But of course, as a person who's very passionate about the issue of life and is very pro-life, I was extremely on board and excited about the prospect of doing an anthology to kind of reach people with that message, and doing it in a way that was, you know, compelling and in an entertaining way, to be able to explore all these different ways of storytelling rather than just preaching at people or, you know, going out and standing on a corner. It was an opportunity to reach another demographic. And so that was exciting to me.
So you have this project, and one of the hardest things I know is herding authors, because authors are like cats. You don't herd them, you just hope they do what they're supposed to do, which is come when you call them or come when you ask them to write a story. So throughout this process, what was it like working with all these different authors of various genres?
You know, honestly, that's part of the thing that I love the most about being in publishing and why I'm even so passionate about it. It was kind of like working with authors is my favorite part. I know we're supposed to be about the readers, but I love working with other creatives and encouraging them. And so much like you, Parker, I just enjoy that part about you, that you're such an encouragement to authors. I love being a part of that and working together and like connecting with people who have a similar passion. And I think that this issue kind of brought some people out too, because I think they had something to say. So it was fun because we all had a shared passion for this particular issue.
I remember when this anthology was first proposed by Crossover Alliance, I really wanted to be a part of it because I am so on board with protecting the life of our young children, and particularly why it's so important within certain communities, more likely minority communities. So it's a very important topic that we need to discuss. And I want to go to Sarah Bowen now, because she really has insight into this issue. So Sarah, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
One thing, Sarah, that I want you to talk about is the problem about pregnancy, life, children, is it really as big of a deal as we think it is? You work in the pregnancy center. Is it as really a big of a deal as I think it is?
So yes, I'm the executive director of a pregnancy medical center, and we're based in Western Pennsylvania. And it is, I would say it's a bigger deal than most people think it is. So one of the issues that we have in our nation is because abortion is legal and because it's honestly, it's celebrated and it's promoted and it's pushed and it's encouraged so heavily in the media, even in schools and in other avenues, is that women feel obligated to consider it as an option. So it's sort of this sense of like, I'm young, I'm in school, I'm not economically stable, I'm struggling, my other child is too young. And so it's this idea of I have to consider abortion. You know, it's the mature decision, it's the responsible decision is to consider an abortion for my child. And so our goal at our pregnancy center is really to come alongside women and walk with them and bless them and minister to them, so that they have the ability and the resources that they need to choose life. And so it's not just educating them, although it is educating them about the baby in the womb and showing them their child on ultrasound and introducing them to this very special, very unique person inside of them, but it's also giving them the help that they need, whether it's plugging them into housing or help with food or help with career, or we provide baby items, diapers, wipes, baby clothes, furniture, those kinds of things, and really making it possible for women to not just have their children, but to thrive and to be healthy, functioning, loving parents.
You brought something to mind, and when you were talking, a friend of mine once said people want us to not abort their children, but they're not willing to put money into saving the children. When you hear a comment like that and someone says you might as well abort them than make them a strain onto society, because a lot of people do feel that way. What's your thoughts about that?
That's honestly where my story came from. So one of my frustrations is I will hear even Christians, well-meaning Christians say, oh, you know, we shouldn't have abortion because we could have aborted the next president, or we could have aborted the person who cures cancer. And that's not really the issue at stake. We certainly could have, but the idea, the reason that abortion is wrong is because individuals are created in God's image. And it's not our job, and it's not, we don't have permission to destroy somebody created in God's image through the act of abortion. And so my story really is about someone who isn't isn't this shining example in society. Like, this is not an individual that is going to cure cancer, or is going to become president, or is going to do all these amazing things, but he still deserved to live. His mother made the courageous choice to deliver him and to take him to a safe place. And then, of course, at the end, he's asking for that same grace to be given to his child. And so I think part of my frustration, honestly, is this idea of, oh, if we don't have abortion, we'll have too many children on foster care, we'll have too many people on welfare. And I'm like, that's above my pay grade. God says that they're created in his image, and God says, let the little children come unto me. And God says, save those who are stumbling to slaughter. And so it's not my job to say, oh, that person's worth saving and that person isn't. Everyone created in God's image is worth saving. Every human life is worth living. And I think that really needs to be the core of our pro-life message, that it's not about what these children could become. It's the fact that they're human and they're worthy of protection.
I'm really glad that you mentioned that, Sarah, because it really puts into perspective what we are talking about. We may not be saving the next president. We may not be saving the next person who makes cancer, but you're giving that person a chance to live. And we're going to go in depth in your story a little bit later on in the broadcast. I want to now go to J.L. Patterson, because J.L., I love his work, and he is going to be on our show pretty soon. So J.L., how's it going today?
It's going well. Thank you.
JL, first of all, I want to say congratulations on the move. I know he moved recently. I'm subscribed to his newsletter, and he always shares these wonderful insights into his life. But coming from this as a father, when you heard about this project, what were some of your thoughts going through your brain as you wanted to bring more people to be a part of this project?
I've always had a pro-life stance for as far back as I can remember. So when the opportunity to write a story for an anthology on this topic came out, I put my creative juices into action and just went for it.
And your story is a forerunner of this anthology, so it really kicks it off really strongly. But as a father, when you hear about this issue, a lot of people say men don't have a say in it. What would be your thoughts to that?
Well, my thoughts would be it does take a man to produce a child. So there's a 50-50 involvement in that. So I don't believe that that's an accurate representation, but that's typically a talking point for the opposition to try to mitigate how many voices are in the arena to advocate for life by taking out an entire segment of the population saying you don't have an opinion. So it's vitally important.
One thing I liked about your particular story is that you look at the consequences of our actions. And I know you talk about that in depth with your first book that we talked about. We were on my show a few years ago. And then The Man Who Thought He Could Fly, which we're going to be doing a show on that pretty soon. Very excited for that one. But in your story, you talk about consequences. And that's something that is often a theme in your story, about the consequences of our actions. Why do you think it's important for us to consider those consequences?
Well, consequences are a part of everyday life. Every decision, I mean, we as humans, we make hundreds, if not thousands of choices from the moment we wake up every morning until the time we go to bed. And everything has a consequence. So oftentimes we make our decisions without even considering what those consequences are. And in a situation in which you have such an important decision, when you find yourself with an unexpected pregnancy, obviously that's a huge decision. And so we're often only given half of the information from one side, and we're never really allowed to provide that other side for a woman and the father to make a fully informed decision on what to do with that pregnancy. And so I think it's important that we provide all information so that they can make that decision, because I think as we've seen through the years, as sonograms and more imaging from inside the womb come out, a lot of people quickly go from wanting to abort their child to keeping their child, because once they see that it's not just a blob of tissue, there is a human being in there and all the potential that comes with that, they quickly change their mind.
As a father, could you imagine not having your children in your life?
No, not at all. They can be a handful at times, but they're a blessing more than I can't even describe it. And I have 6 of them. So they can be a handful at times if I didn't stress that, but they're quite the blessing.
You definitely did your part in being fruitful and multiplying, right? Just joking, JL, just joking. Now I want to shift my conversation to Jess Hannah. And Jess, thank you for joining us today on the show. How you doing?
I'm doing very well. Thank you, Parker. It's always a pleasure.
Now, Jess, you have a different, I'm reached to you because I do have a different view about this because as far as I know, you don't have children. Is that correct?
That is correct.
But why does that make you still want to be a part of this anthology? Because some people may say you don't have a right to have a voice in this. You don't even have kids. What would you say to that?
Well, I would say that life is important regardless of whether or not you do have children, and it is important to protect life and to fight for that cause. So regardless of whether or not I have children, I still have, I don't even know how many nieces and nephews and other relatives in my life, and everyone is important.
That's the key that you said there that I think is very important. Everyone is important. And like Sarah was saying earlier when we were talking to her, everyone has the right to have their life. It doesn't matter if they're going to be upstanding citizen or the worst person you could possibly think of. Everyone has that right because God gave them that right. So Jess, in your story, you know, you and I both like horror, and your story, you really take an interesting, I want to say almost near future dystopian look. And in your story, you pull back the veil on what is happening. And one of the things that was quite scary about your story was the fact that most people left the clinic when they didn't want a child smiling because it was so easy. Do you think, and this is just me, you know, thinking out loud, do you think that because technology is getting better, that eventually we will be desensitized to these issues?
Well, I think in some sense there is a lot of desensitization going on with that issue. So really the concept of the story was to kind of turn things on their head. So in the near future, people are able to design their children, get them in a constant sort of sterile or protected environment. So in the beginning, the characters already have a child that is being developed in an artificial womb. And then they accidentally become pregnant and then have to take a look at those issues and decide what to do from there, as natural childbirth in that near future dystopian world is uncommon and looked down on and not considered something that people would do. And they have to deal with the consequences of that, as JL referred to earlier. Once they have the information, now it's the responsibility of the characters to decide what are they going to do with it.
And there's more to that story we're going to talk about a little bit later on the broadcast. Now, of course, I got to bring the preacher on board. So we got Pastor Chris on here, who I call Reverend GQ. Pastor Chris, how you doing today?
Doing well. You're always giving me a hard time, Parker. What's going on?
The thing is, I'm totally serious. To my listeners out there, I'm telling you right now, the Weeks family is probably the most beautiful family in the world.
Oh,
like every gene of good looks landed in this family. Okay, so the rest of us have to work at it.
My dad thought he was Elvis. That's the problem.
That's probably what it is. That's probably what it is. But Chris, thank you again for being with me. You know, I always enjoy our conversations, and you've been, and personally in my life, you've helped me with a lot of different things. And so this question really is for you. As before we delve into the stories, because I know our listeners really want to get into those stories. Before we delve into our stories, let's talk about the title of this book, which is Life in Anthology, 15 short stories. And I can never say the name, Imago Deo.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay. Yeah. Imago Deo. And so let's
Some
talk.
people say Imago Dei, but
Imago
either
Dei.
Yeah.
Okay. But you're the pastor with the degree. So which one is it?
Imago Dei.
Imago Dei. Okay. So let's talk about Imago Dei. What do we mean by this phrase?
Well, when God created man and woman, each individual carries his image. And I would even say that that image is so priceless that even according to Genesis chapter 9, it should not be destroyed. God has planned for every person to not only of agency on this earth to represent him, but also to know him and worship him. And worship is our highest calling. It's the greatest gift ever given to human beings. And to take that away from somebody is taking them away from the knowing God, who's incredible. God's everything. And it's funny, we were talking about why do we think we have the right to decide who gets to live and who doesn't get to live? That's the Creator's option. And we're kind of arrogant when we are allowed to live. And then we say, you know what? No more. That's not our right. We don't have that right to do that. That's only God's right. And so he's a creator. I bow to him.
One thing you mentioned is that he's a creator. And those of you who may or may not know, we recently showcased Alan Arnold on the show. And Alan Arnold is a wonderful creative coach. But he talks about how when God revealed himself to us in the beginning of the Bible, it's as creator. And we are creators because we were born, I mean, not born, but made from a creator. And so we have these limited communicable attributes of creativity. It is our decision when we create a story, when we create a piece of art, to do what we want with that. It doesn't belong to the creation. It's our decision because we know, we hope we know in some limited way, what's best for that creation. How can we put this idea into some people who are really resistant to the idea that it's my body, my choice? If I want to destroy what's created in me, I can do that. I hope I don't sound like devil's advocate, but I really think that's something we can discuss.
Yeah, that right there, you're asking a very difficult question. And the reason why is because I really believe there's an adversary. 2 Corinthians 4:4 says, the God of this world has blinded the minds of the unbelievers so that they might not see the glory of God in the face of Christ. So by nature, fallen man, which means sin has tarnished all of us, fallen man is resistant to God's truth. And not only that, fallen man hates God. And when God's image is on people, there is a natural hatred, animosity, alienation of people towards each other. And really, all abortion is just the manifestation of hatred towards God. That's really all it is.
Chris, as always, you take a difficult question and answer it. I love it. I love it, Chris.
Oh, thanks.
And for our viewers out there, I just want to let you know we are talking to the authors and publisher of Life Anthology, a celebration of Imago Deo, 15 short stories. That anthology is available right now on Amazon.com or wherever books are sold. The link will be in the show description below this video, and I know you are definitely going to enjoy it. Now, I'm so excited to start to delve into this anthology. And of course, before I delve into it, I got to get some more background with this anthology, Jackie. So what were some of the other behind the scenes looks at getting this anthology together?
Oh, there was a lot of work involved. A lot of like going through the different stories and editing, and my part, I had to do the graphic design and coming up with the design and doing the layout, the formatting, the book formatting, and getting the introduction written and all kinds of fun stuff, the back copy, so there's just, it's, as you know, just publishing a book is a lot of work, but I've never done an anthology like helping out, but never like being kind of the one responsible and having to meet deadlines. And so that kind of was a little overwhelming at times, but it was fun. But it's like, I don't know when I want to do it again, because it was a lot more difficult than just doing like, your own book or somebody else's book, like just a book by one author, like wanting to make sure you're like capturing everybody's voice properly, because people have different writing styles and you don't want to alter that too much. But you want there to be consistency in your editing and in the formatting, and you just want to honor everybody, and then putting people in order and like which stories, because we had so many different genres. It was important to me to mix those up, that we didn't just have one type of genre. We had a lot of different styles, and keep it interesting, so that it's kind of like making a mixtape. You kind of want it to have a flow. And I used to be like the master of mixtapes, so that's important to me.
I just went back in time when you said that. Thank you so much. I appreciate you. So did you select these stories all by yourself, or did you have help?
Oh, no, I definitely didn't. Because as I said, the Crossover Alliance had accepted quite a few of them, a huge, like probably 2/3 of them by the time I had acquired it from David. So mine was already in there, and Jess's, like I said, everybody except for Sarah, she submitted after the fact. So when I got it, I opened it back up. But Jess was the one who was part of the acquisitions editor team for the Crossover Alliance. So he had more of a part of that than I did by far. I didn't really yay or nay anybody. I was more just like, give me what the Crossover Alliance already had. And everybody got on board pretty much. I think I got maybe everybody but one person signed the contract for Doorway to do it. So that's how much everybody wanted to be involved. But yeah.
Jess, let me ask you this question, because you were influential in acquiring these various stories. What's it like going through all these submissions and seeing so many ideas pop on the page?
Well, it can be somewhat intimidating because while I do write, seeing these stories, it's just incredible the range and the depth of imagination and creativity that goes into these stories. And at the time that the Crossover Alliance had the anthology, I had only reviewed about 1/3 of the stories. So I still had to refresh my memory because there was a time lapse, and then also read the other submissions that were sent in. And one thing that struck me about that, and you mentioned it and Jackie mentioned it as well, is the variety of genres. I mean, it is just astounding that these 15 authors get together and no two stories are alike. And that was just coincidence or providence, depending on how you want to view it.
Jackie, wouldn't you say that diversity reflects just in life of how many people bring different aspects of creativity to the world at large?
Absolutely. And what was even more astounding was that people had different issues that were important to them. So not everybody just talked about just strictly the abortion issue. I mean, there was, immigration, and there was about the elderly and sick, handicap. And so there were a lot of different issues that touched people's hearts that they wrote about. And just seeing, the writers' hearts and the passion they put into their stories was astounding. Yeah.
Chris, Jackie said something that I want you to respond to. You said that this collection of stories is about life. And you mentioned how
Imago Dei.
Imago Dei, you mentioned how that is the image of God in us. But when we think about God, we think of the diversity that's within him as well. Why is that concept important to this discussion of life? Because like Jackie said, we're not just talking about just abortion, we're talking about other things as well.
Truthfully, Parker, it goes back to the Trinity. To me, it's a Trinitarian expression of God is three distinct people, but one essence. And all three of those are unified both in love, cooperation, but really more than anything, humility, loving, putting the other person before yourself. I think truthfully, the diversity of human beings, we really can only associate when we sacrifice for other people. And to me, when you are willing to take an innocent baby's life, that is the height of arrogance, just the opposite of humility. So here you have a human being that is completely vulnerable, cannot take care of itself in its mother's womb, and they're entrusting themselves to the care of their parents who don't care for them. It's disgusting, actually. It's appalling. And so to me, every person has a facet. God created each person, it says in Psalm 139, wonderfully and fearfully, as if he took his time, his exquisite time to make beautiful people. And if we ignore that, we're smashing his handiwork. And that's the highest sin you can really perpetrate.
Sarah, let me ask you this question as you listen to the responses of your fellow writers here. Your work at the Pregnancy Center, how does that really affect you when you saw this call for stories for this anthology?
Well, it's kind of interesting because I didn't write the story because of the anthology. Actually, I was having a rough day, so I just sat down. I love writing. I don't get to do enough of it, and I just wrote the story, and it just happened very quickly. And I sent it to a friend of mine, and I said, I don't know what I'm going to do with this, if I'm going to do anything with this, but this just happened, and I want to share it with you. And she suggested that I share it, that I pass it on and submit to the anthology. So it sort of was backwards. Like I didn't see that the anthology was looking for life stories or pro-life stories and think, oh man, I want to be part of that. I probably would have, but I wasn't looking for it. I wasn't thinking about it. It just happened.
And in your work, do you see various situations that happen with people where it may look as if it's easier just to take care of this problem via abortion, but it's harder to go forward with that? I know you can't give us, details, but just in a general way, tell us about how that affects your viewpoint about the sanctity of life.
I think that what I do has really strengthened my faith. So when James says, and I'm going to get this wrong, and there's a pastor listening, but when
you better get it right,
I'm going to get it right. I'm going to lose points in eternity. But when James says that he shows you his faith by his works, to me, I never really understood that until I jumped into pregnancy help. And it's like, I have the faith. I believe that God can change and help and heal anyone. And I show that by going into work every day and ministering to people, to individuals that some people would say are beyond hope. Because I believe that God can save them, and I believe that God can heal them, and I believe that God can bring beautiful, amazing things out of the situation that they're in, and he does not fail. And so there are lots, sometimes and this is where my story came from. I was frustrated because I think everyone wants the easy story. She came in, she was abortion minded, she chose life, everybody's great, everybody's happy, the end, everybody lived happily ever after. And that's not really how life works. That's not how anyone's life works. That's not how my life works. Life is messy, and it's difficult, and it's challenging, and it requires, and life is harder than death. So to take someone and say you should have an abortion, you're done. Like, take them to the clinic, drop them off, pick them up when it's over, go home, you're done. But if you say to someone, I want you to have your baby, I want to help you, you're committed, because babies are babies, and they are born and they grow up. And like anyone with kids can tell you, they don't leave. We have one that's been hanging around now for 12 years. And I'm like, dude, what, you gonna get a job or something? And there's like labor laws, you can't do that. So I mean, you've got kids till they're 18. Now parents are laughing, other people are like, what is she talking about? I have a 12-year-old. I have 4 kids actually, but it requires a lot more when someone chooses life. And so it's easy to say, get an abortion, just be done with it. It's hard to say, I'm going to walk beside you as you choose life. And it's so important. And I think it's one of the most important things a Christian can do is to walk with someone in the difficulty and in the valley and in the challenges, and walk with them like Christ would.
Well, JL, Sarah gave us a perfect segue into your story. So go ahead, tell us a little bit about what your story is talking about, and then we're going to delve right deep down and dirty into it.
Well, obviously the topic of the anthology was from a pro-life position. And so I like to write and tell stories that lead the reader down one road, just to grab them and jerk them off that road at the end, to get them kind of almost like a bait and switch, if you will, but without the negative connotation of a bait and switch. So in the case with this, I think my intention was to take the reader down a certain road, thinking they were going a certain direction and probably even guessing how it was going to end, only for it to twist on them at the end and give them a different perspective. And part of that is the challenge is you want to tell a story that hasn't, because I've heard that it's been said that there's really no story that's ever, every story's already been told in the world, and it's just how you tell that unique story. And so I try to strive for telling a story on a subject such as this matter that isn't like Sarah had mentioned, she comes in, she had a decision She gets information, she becomes pro-life, and everybody goes on with their happy lives. Kind of just showing a little bit of a different angle, which leads the reader to contemplate that a decision that could have been made for abortion, leads the reader to contemplate on that some more.
And that's the thing too, is that as you read your story, 12 White Tulips, you find out that what you thought you were reading isn't what's going on. And it kind of lets us know about how we really have to be conscientious of the decisions that we're making. We're not talking about small decisions as if, am I going to eat ice cream today or hot dogs? You know, hopefully you can eat both, but or something like that. You're talking about a decision that affects the rest of your life. Not saying that eating a hot dog or ice cream won't affect the rest of your life either. If you eat 12 of them, that will affect your life too. But you know, we're making really hard decisions when it comes to that. And so in your story, and we don't want to give away any spoilers per se, but in your story, it starts off one way, like you said, it's like a bait and switch. And as I was reading, I said, oh wow, this is such a nice, pleasant story, you know. Then all of a sudden you go crashing into a wall. And but that's what you like to do though, JL. It's not the first time you've done that. You like to crash people into walls. That's just your nature. So what happens when you write. And so let's talk about the main characters here. We have Becky and we have I think her name was Debbie. Yeah, Becky and Debbie. Yeah, Becky and Debbie. So tell us about what's going on with Debbie.
Deborah's laid up in the hospital. She hurt herself. She fell and hurt her hip. So she finds herself in the hospital, and her daughter is coming down from another state to come visit her at the hospital. So that's kind of where that setting takes place.
Another thing too is that JL starts off his story like a Twilight Zone episode, and this is a recurring theme for him as well. So what I'm going to do is just read a very quick excerpt from 12 White Tulips. It's just going to be Rod Serling's point of view. Witness Deborah Russo, age 74, recovering from a common injury for those her age. But it's what's happening to her mind that's more debilitating than any bruise or broken bones life can throw at her. And that's just a quick, interesting tip into the story, 12 White Tulips. Now, when it comes to writing shorter fiction, do you find it more difficult? Do you find it easier? Tell us about that.
Yeah, actually, it is easier because there's a whole lot less you have to do. You're just writing a short story. And when I started out writing, I initially started writing a novel, and that's still on the back burner because then I came across a quote from, oh, help me. I did this in the last interview, completely forget Ray Bradbury. Thank you. So he had written something or said something about how that when you start out writing, you shouldn't write. Your first book shouldn't be a novel. You should write a short story a week. And at the end of the year, you'll have 52 short stories, and they can't all be bad. So when I stumbled upon that quote, I started thinking about, I'm like, yeah, this might be the better route to go. Plus, by doing the short stories, you start developing the characteristics that you're going to take into writing a full-blown novel down the road. So I did write a longer fiction in the Island, which you have read, but the short stories are different in the sense that you're not getting too in depth into everything. It's much more truncated. So yeah, they're obviously a lot easier to write.
And what's so surprising about 12 White Tulips is that within that short context, you do have characterization. You have characterization with Debbie and with Becky. And they're obviously a very strong mother-daughter relationship. And Becky is very concerned about her mother because it's not just the fact that she hurt her hip, it's something else going on. What else is going on?
Well, her mother's suffering from some mental deficiencies, not Alzheimer's, but similar to Alzheimer's, or her mind's not all there, and she is forgetting a lot of things. And so there's that concern with her mom there. So yeah, her daughter is concerned about her for that aspect as well.
But what I really like about the dynamic between Debbie and Becky is just the closeness that they have as mother and daughter, and just the concern that she has. And they don't shy away from the problem. They accept the problem. They don't, hide about it, which I think is very important when you're dealing with issues like that. So within this story, what you did that I liked is that you address familial relationships, you address the elderly, and you also address, being there for those who can't be there for themselves. And all of that really does fall into the context of Imago Deo. Imago Deo. Yes, okay, Imago Dei, all fall into that category. So for those of you listening, 12 White Tulips by J.L. Patterson is the first story in this anthology, and it starts off very strong. And I'm going to let you know right now, once you pick up your copy of this book and you start to read the story, you're going to think you know what's happening, and then he's going to crash you into a wall. In a good way, it's going to hurt, but it's a good crash into a wall. And I say crash because it really is a crash. There's no other way to describe it. And JL would probably be pretty happy about that, but it's such a wonderfully told story. And JL, thanks for that contribution to your story there.
Sure.
Jackie, I want to go back to you because one of the next stories in this book is called The Mistake I Never Made, and it's by an author who's not with us today. Her name is Yasha Hepperly. Let's talk about this story because I think a lot of women who make a decision, particularly about whether or not to have their children or not, fall into this category. Maybe they don't. Tell us about her story. Just give us the chunks of it.
Well, first I'll just introduce Yasha. She's also known as Yasha Mariah. She had a novella that was released through the Crossover Alliance called Without a Vision. And so she's been writing for a while. Just to explain that it's the same person, it's the same author. She went under this pen name for this story. But as far as the story was concerned, it has to do with, sometimes I think when we're young, we make decisions because we see what's happened in other people's lives and we don't want to have that same trajectory. Like we can almost like be disgusted with what we see in other people and the mistakes that they made rather than seeing how they turned out. Like we just see it as the mistake. And so I think a lot of young people, that's why they make decisions like abortion, is because they're thinking immediate. They're not thinking, they don't know what God's plan is for that situation. So they're just thinking in the immediate or maybe what they've seen. And so it's about a young girl who, I mean, how much I'm trying to figure out how much to tell, but it's basically about a girl who decided to get an abortion where her sister did not, because she didn't want to make the same mistake her sister made.
I think it's important too, because Yasha really shows a dynamic here that our children are thinking. They're not passive observers of life. They are instigators in their life. And I mention this show all the time. It was on Netflix called Babies. It's a documentary about babies. And they were showing even from a small, tiny child, they are instigators in their life. They may not be able to speak or talk. They can't hold their heads up. They can't walk. You got to feed them, do all this stuff, but they're constantly instigating in their life. And so here, imagine if they're instigating at newborns, what are they doing when they're teenagers? And so it lets us know, just as parents, you need to be aware what your children is doing. For one thing, this is just me, there was no way I was going out my mom and dad's house when I was 16. There's just no way. Like, they don't know where I am. They don't trust me that much. No, you are in the house at 4 o'clock. No, you can't have a boyfriend. That's not happening. I remember when I turned 14, I said, Mom, can I start calling boys? No. Right? And I turned 16, I said, Mom, can I start calling boys? No. Right? So I didn't start talking to boys till about 17. I mean, just that, they just really kept a tight control of me. And yeah, it is kind of strict now that I think about it, but they kept tight control over you, but they were aware of your actions. And then here, it lets you know that children are going to do what they're going to do. So you need to have really deep conversations with them. What do you say?
Oh, I would say I kind of grew up in an opposite kind of situation where, my parents didn't really keep very big tabs on us too much. So yeah, I was talking to boys at a young age, and yeah, they didn't always know where I was or what I was doing or who I was with. And, God, God watched over me through all of that. Like, I didn't make any major blunders in that, that he gave me wisdom at a young age to not do anything too ridiculous despite the freedom. But my parents were stricter than a lot of other people's. So it's kind of strange. I guess it's all perspective on that end, but
I like how Yasha.
Yeah, I think it helped, but I would just say, yeah, it does help. But at the same time, my parents did trust me and I didn't really completely let them down. So.
Not completely. I haven't turned into a serial killer. I promise I haven't done that. No. But what I like too that Yasha mentions is the fact that when the protagonist of our story, Tasha, her name's Natasha, when she decides to have this abortion, it really affects her. And she didn't even know that it was affecting her. And they talk about this, and I think I want Sarah to kind of chime in on this. They talk about post-abortive stress that comes on with women. Tell us a little bit about that, Sarah, and why it's so important to minister to those women who have decided to have abortions.
So I actually tell people that I got into pro-life work for the babies, but I stay for the mothers. What women go through after an abortion is absolutely terrible. And sometimes the first emotion is relief, but it's often very shortly followed by grief and shame and regret. And it's a decision that can't be undone. And it's awful. And we've talked to so many women that, they have an abortion and they call us back the next week and they're like, you were right. Like, you told us we would feel this. You told me that I would feel this way. You told me. And so part of our ministry is walking alongside women who are broken and who are hurting. And sometimes it's an abortion that happened last week, and sometimes it's one that happened last year. But I have talked to women, especially in churches, I've talked to women who had an abortion 50 years ago, and I'm the first person they've ever told. And I've gone and I've shared from the pulpit, about the ministry, and I talk about the post-abortive ministry and how important that is. And I'll have someone come up and as she walks by, just whisper in my ear, I had an abortion. And sometimes I wonder, am I the first person she's ever told? And I don't even know who she is. And there's no way for me to connect with her. And so it's a real thing. And I think back to what Chris said, we have an enemy, because otherwise abortion makes no sense. If we could really look at it honestly, we would realize it's not good for women. But we're not looking at it honestly. And that's why it continues to happen.
Another aspect that I liked about this particular story, Jackie, was the fact that Yasha brought in the male perspective on this story, because after she had the abortion, the father of the child did not want to have an abortion. He was like, well, maybe you could think about this. And yes, his faith had a lot to do with that. He was Catholic in the story. His faith had a lot to do with that. But I think it was more than that. It's like, for him, he felt as though, okay, I made this decision. We're going to just have to deal with the consequences. Like I said with JL, we were talking earlier, the consequence of that. Do you think often that when it comes to this conversation about pro-life and about abortion, we really need to have all parties involved, not just a woman involved in this?
Oh, absolutely. I'd say this is one of the issues that is so important to me as well, and inspired my own story, is the idea that men don't really have a voice in this issue because they don't want an opposing voice. And so I think that they silence the men because they don't want anybody to oppose them once they've made that decision. So I don't think it's so much that they really don't believe they have a say, because the baby is 50% theirs, and the action that it required to create the child was 50% theirs. And it's like, all of a sudden now you just want to cut that out. But yet in that story, that was a very impactful relationship, which was something that also caused a lot of hurt and regret, not just the act of abortion, but how it affected that relationship, because it does. You can't just resume life as normal when you've made a big decision like that. It's like there's a lot of moral consequences in that.
And for our viewers and listeners, when you pick up this anthology, this particular story is highly emotive. It really does tug at your heartstrings. Our narrator, through Natasha, expresses what she is feeling. And I know, based off what Sarah told me, what she is saying that this author captured is very true, and that there is stress and depression and other mental fatigues that come to women who are post-abortive. And now it brings me to the speculative edge of this with the conception conspiracy. And this story I definitely love, because first of all, I love Jess as a author. His first book, the first thing I ever read by him was If It Causes You to Sin. And it was on the Untold podcast, written by one of the authors of this, performed by one of the authors of this particular anthology. And after that, I just became like his, that fan, the one that we all really want, but it's actually kind of scary. Not like Misery though, not like Stephen King's Misery, not her. I don't want to hobble you or anything like that, Jess. But I really love the conception conspiracy because it takes a speculative edge on this issue in a near future dystopian world. Well, what we call it dystopian, according to the people in the story, is probably utopian, wouldn't it be?
I would agree. I would think that the people in the story would consider it a utopian world where where conception is completely controlled. They've mitigated all of the factors. They allow people to choose features of their children depending on how much money they want to pay into it, editing out all propensity to disease, choosing gender, choosing any number of features that they would like. They get to design their children and then know that they're completely protected while they're being developed.
What was really interesting was the fact that this is not far off. They have what's called now designer babies now. And I remember reading an article about this, and boys were highly sought after in these designer baby things. So this is not just fiction. This is reality right now. You can pay a lot of money to get certain genes turned on and turned off in your child. And that's today. 2022. That's today. So I just want to let our listeners know this is not just sci-fi, it's sci-fi reality, if you want to put it that way. What I found pretty interesting was the fact that they would take the child away from the wound and put it into an enclosed wound. It reminded me of that movie I Am Mother that was on Netflix with Hilary Swank, and the robot was raising the baby, and then the child raised the baby, whatever. And I was like, wow, they even want to take the sense of motherhood away, detach you completely. Because, every mother who has been a mother has felt the kick of a child in their belly. Everyone has felt it. Even fathers, when they're, next to their, the mother, they put their hand on there, they can listen to the baby, all these things that really draw and deepen that relationship. In your story, you've ripped that apart. You put the baby in a enclosed outside womb. Again, something else that is quite, it's on the verge of happening, where you can have a child outside the womb. They're really doing these things now. So yeah, so it's not, that's why I say it's near future. It's near future dystopia. And what I liked about that was you showed the distance with the character Melodia and her mother. Tell us a little about their relationship and how it reflects this type of distance from the wound.
Oh, absolutely. So Melodia and her mother, they do have an interesting relationship where her mother does seem to be heavily involved in the vanity of society. So she obviously is aging, but Melodia has an interaction with her and can tell that she's had another procedure to make herself look younger. And this is just an aspect of her life that in this society, they've become enlightened to the point where they're only focused on themselves. And there's even a point where they're sitting in a waiting room together, and her mother is completely preoccupied with whatever is going on her electronic tablet, whether it's work or personal issues. And Melodia needs her mother, and it's just not there. That connection doesn't exist. And I think that is an unintended consequence of this type of creative environment where you completely remove people, even though they have purposely designed these children. There just seems to be a lack of connection there that just perpetrates that relationship.
It reminded me of how, when parents know their children, they know them quite well because they've been with them every moment of the day. Even as they get older, like I know I'm in my 40s, my mother still knows me and I'm still her child. Nothing will ever change that. But no matter how much I want my independence, I will still be her baby, right? Independence is a joke, right? But at the same time, you still have that connection. We hope you do anyway, or a mother figure for those of us who don't have our natural mothers and fathers. And what I liked about this story is you show that through this thing. Now, what's happening in this story, what's really interesting is that, and this happens quite in the beginning, so it's not quite a spoiler, they're very excited about their new baby that's incubating in this outward chamber. Then they discover, oh my goodness, we're doing it the old-fashioned way, and we're going to have a baby the old-fashioned way. Well, what happens to that scenario now?
Right. So in that scenario, they have the created child and then accidentally become pregnant, and it's just a complete shock to both of them. They don't know how this could happen because in that future environment, you can shut off your reproductive capabilities, just basically like switching on and off a light switch. And they just are flabbergasted at how it could happen. And in that culture, their immediate reaction is to get rid of it. It's scary. You don't know what's going to happen. It's unpredictable. We don't have any idea what genetic makeup this child has, and also healthcare in the future. You can't exactly go to see a doctor for this because their immediate recommendation will be termination. So they have to try to figure out, should we just go with tradition and what we've learned in the past, or should we question our tradition and find another trajectory? And it just sets off an entire journey where truth is revealed to Melodia, and she has to make a decision with her husband on what they should do. And then her mother is also a part of that entire process. So it's just really, I think that it's setting up a kind of false tradition that is in the future, where for hundreds of years they have thought things in a certain way, and now they have to challenge that thinking and figure out where they should go from there.
And I love the fact that you put this particular genre in the sci-fi horror, and I love it. I love it. And most people know I'm a horror fan anyway, so I loved it. And there's that horror element. It won't freak you out and have you pull out your hair screaming. It won't do anything like that. It just makes you realize what's going on. So there is that element in there. So for those of you who are a little squeamish, you'll be fine. So you'll be fine. I totally believe you'll be fine. But I like that. And it lets me know too that just as Christian authors, I know we're Christian authors, most everybody here is a Christian author. And with that, we'd use these really interesting genres to bring about a particular message. And you chose to use this one, which I definitely loved. And that's an encouragement to our listeners out there who want to write and think they always have to write sweet, soft, and predictable. You don't have to do that. And one thing I wanted to do though, Jess, as I read your story, I was so mad because I wanted it to continue. It was like, oh my gosh, what happens next? And so you're definitely, when you pick up this copy of your book, you're definitely going to feel as if, what, wait, there's more to the story. And hopefully then you'll sign up for the other authors' works on their websites and know more about them, which are going to be below in the show description. So Jess, I want to thank you so much for your contribution to the anthology. I'm just going to read a very quick excerpt here. Chad reacted as predicted when she told him the bad news that night in the bedroom. The shock on his face told her all she needed to know. Melodia, we were careful. This is so wrong. How could this happen to us? He threw his hands up in the air before burying his head in them. He sat down heavy on the edge of the bed. She shared his deep concern. I don't know why this happened, but it did. I'll get an appointment in a couple of days to take care of it. I'll have my mom take me. That's just a quick excerpt from The Conception Conspiracy, which is one of the stories in this anthology. Jess, thank you so much. And now let me go back to you, Jackie, because there's another story in here that I thought was really unique. And it's by Nathan James Norman, who, as most of you know, I love Nathan. He is the creator of the Untold podcast. And so, of course, he will come with a unique aspect to this story. It's called Foster Grave. Tell us a little bit about this story, Jackie.
Let me think. Okay. So like I said, some of these stories, it's been a while since I've read them, but I do know that it had to do with ghosts and watching, was it a funeral? Actually, you're probably more refreshed on the details of that story because you just read it again. But
so I'll talk about it. I have no problem talking about it and just have you share thoughts with me. So basically, there's these ghosts that are there to put other ghosts to rest. They're at a funeral. And so he has a new recruit. So it has that almost that noir style of this, this guy who's been at this for a long time. Then a new recruit comes in and he's training him. And so what I like that Nathan did in this particular story is that he added that paranormal element. And I've always tell people with Christian fiction, Christian authors, it doesn't all have to be the same. In this case, he did paranormal. And I know some people may go, but wait, why does he have to talk about ghosts? It's for a purpose, I assure you. So I'm really excited about this one. So he sees this woman and she's in this church crying. And attached to her are 3 ghosts, but they're not like ghosts he's not used to seeing. As a matter of fact, these ghosts are the ghosts of aborted children. And they're doing things to her. And one of the things that they're doing, they're sucking at her and they're filled with rage. And so that's what the gist of the story is, because now he has to put these ghosts to rest. How do you do that? So that's kind of like the plot of his story. When you got this particular story though, Jackie, what were some of your initial thoughts as you were reading it?
Well, it was definitely an original concept. Like, it was very different than I would have expected and different than other stuff I've read by him, but it didn't surprise me that he would take that direction either. He's always really open to doing something different and unusual and even controversial or edgy, or, but even because he's also a pastor, aside from being the producer of the Untold podcast. So I guess that made it a little more interesting too, that he went with this idea of ghosts, just because that'd be a little controversial, maybe theologically, but I found it to be a very fascinating concept that one ghost was training the other one to try to like show them how to help people move into the afterlife, or one, yeah. So with these babies that were disgruntled and they were very restless. They weren't moving along the way they should into the afterlife. Which
and that
was
was
almost like a Beetlejuice kind of thing.
Yes. 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 And the fact that that, I don't know how I feel about that. So anyway, but there's a scene in here that I'm going to read, but I really liked Nathan's take on this because he is talking about the after effects. And that's the part about speculative fiction I love so much, is these what if questions. What if the spirits of the lingering aborted children linger? And what if they're asking questions themselves, but they can't even talk? And so when he sees his sight, they're screaming and they're wailing, and the wails are screaming so much because in the story they don't have lungs because they don't have it fully developed, but they have enough conscious, if you will, to scream and scream and scream, and they are attacking their mother who did this. And so I'm going to read a quick excerpt from here. Ray shook his head. I don't know. It was all rather theoretical. Souls are created in a gateway in this world, and they must pass to the next through a gateway as well. One of the two babies on the woman's lap leapt toward the man who was still stuttering over the phone. It latched onto his mouth, pushing its face into his tongue. The man dropped the phone, fell to the floor, and began squealing, not unlike a pig. Ray, I hate this job. I really do. I told them that I am good with kids 8 and up. These kids you can reason with. Anything under is utter frustration. And that's an excerpt from the story Foster Grave. That's one of the stories here in the Life Anthology. Now, the next story I want to go to is the one where before the broadcast, I told Chris, you just can't not be controversial. Chris can't do it. And I love it because Chris took this in a whole different direction that is sure to make people think. And that was the whole point of his story. Think about it for a second. So Chris, I'm going to put you on the hot seat here. And your story is My Land, My Choice. So give us just the gist of what's going on in this particular story.
Well, I'll tell you the origin of the story, Parker. You'll like this. I was a youth pastor, and what I like to do in senior high is have debates, and I would break up the students. One half would take one side and one half would take the other. So one half of the side took pro-abortion, one was pro-life. And it was really interesting because a lot of the people on the pro-abortion side who are Christians are like, yeah, I have no problem with it. And there was the high school students that I was working with, when they were completely honest, because it was law, it was okay. Because the government said, Roe v. Wade, this is what we passed, there must be okay. So I was trying, it really bothered me. So I was saying, and this is when George Bush was president, and I said, hey, did you guys hear what passed? George Bush had this new law passed, because he's from Texas, that if anybody is an illegal immigrant, they're allowed to shoot them, just shoot them dead, because they're really just a problem for the farmer in Texas. And it's the farmer's land, so they should have every right to get rid of the person that illegally comes on their land. And so he got this passed, and now they can hunt down immigrants. And the students were shocked, and they were just shocked. I'm like, what are you guys shocked about? You mean to tell me he's gunning down Mexicans, human beings? Because we live in this area where we have fruit farms and a lot of Mexican, summer workers, migrant workers. And I said, yeah, what's wrong with that? If they're on the farmer's land, it's their property. Shouldn't they have the right to decide who gets to live there or not? And they're like, no, they're a human being. They can't kill a human being. I said, well, then why is abortion okay? Isn't it exactly the same thing? And they just stopped dead. They did not know what to say. They didn't know what to say. And it entered into a good conversation about human life. What is human life? And so I use that to write that story.
And let me tell you, for those of you who are aware of just the multi layers of this particular story, it's not a simple story. It's told simply, but it's not a simple story because there's a dynamic here because it is my land and you should be able to protect your land. No one would disagree with that. Okay. But then you have these parties in the story. I hope I'm not giving too much away, but you have these parties of people who are going out, loading up bull, get their can of bull, a monster, and they're loading out to go shoot these illegal migrants that are coming onto their land. And this man just moved there. He's dealing with his own tragedy because his wife passed away and his daughter is missing her mom and everything. And so the most of the story deals with the this whole idea of my land, my choice, which is legislation um, put into law in this particular story. So now the whole story is that, and then toward the end you get this, and you're just really jarred when you get to that. And so reading this story, you kind of just can't believe that everyone would be okay with this.
Yeah, they just can shoot anybody down at will because they're a non-person. Since they're by law considered a non-person, go get them. You can do whatever you want to them. So go ahead.
And that was scary. And that was really scary. And so it kind of brought these other arguments that people have used when it comes to the issue of pro-choice and pro-life, that you bring these arguments in a context you can understand. Now, there's a term for some of this called, I think you will almost probably call this absurdist, like an absurdist story.
Yeah, it's hyperbole,
yeah,
exaggeration. Yeah,
absurdist. But absurdists usually do that to make a point. They're actually trying to do it to make a point. So they really highly exaggerate these scenarios where you think about it, because no one would ever let this happen. No one would. I don't care if you're upset about immigration laws or whatever. No one would let that happen. But what if they did? And see, that's the question here. And I was laughing in a good way. I said, good old Chris, I can always depend on him to just
Didn't you like it though, Parker?
Oh, I enjoyed it. I enjoyed it. I really did. And there's a scene in here where it gets kind of dark. And I was just really sad. Like the whole story got dark, and not dark because there was something really bad happen. It was the implications of it that happened. And so this is the story, My Land, My Choice. And it's in it's in several parts. And I'm just going to read a quick excerpt from it. Ever since the new law allowing for the extermination of any illegals found on Arizona land, the My Land, My Choice legislation that passed in the Arizona House a year ago, dead corpses lying in the desert have become too common a sight. And that is just a quick excerpt from that, because what Chris did, he named this fictional town. Why?
Actually, it's a real town.
Really?
Yeah, it's a real town right on the border.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Now I have to go look it up. Now I have to go look it up. I have to go look it up now. But that's even better. That's even better, actually. That's just even better. So I love it, Chris. So when you were writing this story, what do you hope the readers gain from reading this particular story?
To me, you have to ask the question, what's life? What is life? And if you're consistent in your logic, in your reason, you're going to have to say a baby born in the womb, it's life. And since it's life, we really don't have the right to just go hunt them down. I also hope they saw how the law, people are dumbed down by, they think because something's legal, then it should be allowed. Because the legislation passed something, then it's morally okay. And I want them to see, no, it's not always morally okay. Just because they passed a law doesn't make the hunting down of a human being morally right. And hopefully they'll get that connection. I don't think people have that connection now. They really do believe, because of that Roe v. Wade passage in the legislation, it's almost a moral thing now to allow abortion. No, this is like, the movie The Purge, like The Purge, you get one day to just kill people. And I'm watching it with my kids. I'm watching it with my two boys. I'm like, a Christian would not let the law dictate if I can murder somebody. This is the stupidest premise. And I don't think people are that wicked. I don't think people, because they have a right to kill somebody one day. There might be some people that do it, but people aren't just going to go hog wild and kill people because of a law. And so that was my point.
I like that movie actually, because it's in a funny way, I could go wait till March 22nd. Just wait.
Right.
March 22nd.
Right. Yeah.
I think it was March 22nd, maybe March. It was in March though. Just wait till March 22nd. It's on, bruh. It's on. But it brings me to my next story that I want to talk about, which is Sarah's story, Code. And it really just segues straight into Sarah's story, because Chris mentions, value of human life, a non-person. And in Sarah's story, the main protagonist, like we said earlier when we were talking about it just briefly, he's not this great person. He's not going to be the next president. Matter of fact, he's, I hate to say it, something of a thug. Wouldn't you say, Sarah?
He has made some very unfortunate life choices. But I think it also, when you read what has happened to him and the circumstances surrounding his birth and his childhood and his adolescence, you feel bad for him. And we want to say, like, you shouldn't do that, and you shouldn't make those choices, and he shouldn't make those choices. And I think he acknowledges that in the story pretty directly. But we also, it's just, again and again, there were opportunities for Christians to step in and make a difference, to step in and help him in a meaningful way, and not for bad reasons. Like, I don't think there really is an evil person necessarily in the story, or a bad person in the story. But for reasons it just never works out. And so he kind of ends up alone.
One thing I like about the story too is that you have this where he, his situation wasn't great, but there's a level of individual accountability here too that I really resonated with, because a lot of people say, well, because of my circumstances, I should get a free whatever. No, he conscientiously made this decision. In the very beginning, you find out that he was with a woman who wanted to be his mother. He was with her. She wanted to be his mother, but it was this coldness, and he calls it cold. It's this coldness inside of him, like this distance. And it makes you wonder if someone had just spoke life into him. And someone tried to, but then, oh my gosh, he died, not a big spoiler, but they died, And so that coldness just continued to spread and spread. But he said, at least my mom, he says very early, gave me a shot. And I think that's what a lot of people would say, just give me a shot. And you work in a situation where you are advocating for mothers to give their children a shot.
Yeah. And I think that's the thing. We all have different circumstances, and we all have different issues in our life and blessings in our life. And those can help us, and they can hurt us. But at the end of the day, it really is our choice. And I know that's not necessarily the most popular opinion today, but that's my opinion. I really believe everybody has a chance. But the story really came from, I was reading on Facebook, of all places, and it was talking about just foster kids, how people, they bring a foster child into their home, and they don't understand why the child isn't adjusting well, or why the child is angry, or why there's temper tantrums, or why they're destroying things. And it's like that feeling when you've been out in the snow and you're so cold you can't even feel your limbs anymore, you can't even feel your hands. And so imagine being placed in a warm bathtub. And so an experience that should be comforting, that should be enjoyable, is actually quite painful. And so that's what these kids are dealing with sometimes. Not obviously every situation is different. And so I wanted to kind of speak for them, and help people understand that when you've been through trauma and you've been through difficulty, like, it's hard to accept normal, and it's hard to accept love, and it's hard to accept safety, because it's almost, you just can't handle it. And the number of children in foster care that maybe will never have a permanent home just breaks my heart.
And that's the sad thing. But the thing is that they have a chance, and people don't want to hear that. They're like, well, he had a crappy life, he could have just did that. But the thing is, it's not up to you to determine what I do with it. It's just not up to you. I remember reading about a woman who had a child who had Down syndrome. This is back in the day, so we're talking like maybe the 40s. And she said, I wish she had terminated him. That's what she said to this boy, but they didn't. And they had a child, and he was very difficult, extremely difficult. He had tantrums, blah, blah. And I said, and a lot of people in the comment section were like, maybe he knew you didn't want him, and maybe he can't express that. Maybe he knew you did not want him. And I think about that a lot, but it's not up to you to decide what I can and can't do. It just isn't.
Right.
You don't put the limits on my life, you know. I want to talk with JL real quickly because he's been too quiet, and we can't have that. We can't have JL be too quiet. As you listen to some of the story ideas in here, JL, what do you think is the gem and the jewel of this particular anthology?
Well, the gem and the jewel, it's a hard question. I would have to say that it's all the different angles and all the different perspectives that can be approached for this common theme of being pro-life. And because it can almost become, over the years, you just hear the same arguments over and over again, and they almost lose their bite. They almost lose their power because you hear it so often, and both sides can almost predict what the other side's going to say next because both sides have argued for so long. So to be able to take on such a topic such as this from different perspectives and different angles is powerful. And what's the most powerful part about it is that it's told through the form of fiction, which I think is an incredible vehicle for changing hearts and minds, because you can reach people in a way with fiction you can't do with nonfiction, or with your greatest polemic or any other type of article or essay or book you want to write. You're going to get a lot of people that may never pick up a book based, if you wrote a book that was, 10 reasons why I'm pro-life, and you should be too, you're going to already segment half of people that potentially read it. But you have a story that displays the virtue of the sanctity of life, and it's told in a fictional tale that the reader can then, when they're done, sit back and digest that because they didn't expect it. You can get so much farther with that in a lot of different ways. And I think that is just incredible that we're able to do that through the vehicle of fiction.
And it brings me to the last story I want to highlight with you, Jackie, and it's Abigail Falanga's story, The Oracle. I particularly love this story, and I loved it because she mishmashed two genres, the superhero genre with this pro-life message. But the person who is the narrator of the story, you wouldn't call her pro-life, would you?
No, and that's kind of like taking off from what JL was just talking about, and also what Chris was talking about, is that in a lot of these situations, I think most people are inherently pro-life. They just don't know it yet. They've been deceived. I think most people, there are wicked people in the world who aren't, but I think most people, if they really hear the right argument, it like turns a light on. And I think they've been deceived by the wrong arguments for a long time, because the enemy's gotten really good at convincing us that these things are actually good and reasonable. And I think in this story, that's what this character goes through, is that she gets the light turned on, so to speak, in this gift that she's given. As the oracle, like is that the one? She can see the people's future, correct?
Yes.
So
yes.
So in that, it changes her perspective about the value of people's lives. And so yes, where she's not pro-life, in fact, she works in an abortion clinic, if I'm remembering that correct. She works in an abortion clinic, and people, I think, like I said, are very deceived, because once she starts to understand the importance of each and every life of the person, that she sees that she can see their future, it changes her perspective completely. And I think that's what we can do with these stories, is to really just turn the light on for people and make them see things from another perspective, that make them go, oh yeah, that isn't right, or that doesn't really make sense,
And particularly in this story, what I liked is that the narrator doesn't have a superpower, and she's going to work, and she sees this boy suddenly have a superpower. He's like manipulating fire, which is totally cool, by the way. Totally awesome. Okay. It won't get burnt. I'm all for it. Turn me into the Human Torch if you want to. I'll be the plus size one, but dang it, I'm the Human Torch. Okay. And so it's like she sees that. She's like, I want to make a difference. She says, I wish I could have a superpower to make a difference. And then she goes on by her job. And then all of a sudden, her superpower comes. And her superpower is that she could see people's futures. And so there's a scene that's really interesting where she is able to use that gift to save a life. She's a superhero. Mm-hmm. But I will not spoil it for you, because this was really a good story. I was so sad, like all of your stories, I was so sad to see them end. And I hope that all of you consider finishing these stories in some capacity. Make it a newsletter sign up. I'll sign up for all your newsletters again, okay? But just do something, because you hate that the stories end. You hate that they end. So I hope it's not just a message, but hopefully you guys can build this world a little bit. Really, but I really liked Abigail's story. I'm going to read a quick excerpt from it. Her arrival at the family planning clinic cut her pipe dream short, since it presented her with two new concerns: an almost full parking lot out front and a new protester across the street. This one seemed especially repulsive. His sign was designed to look like a high-end restaurant menu, and he was yelling something like "Special of the day, fresh baby, roasted pan-seared." Shutting up jerks like him would be a nice superpower. And that's an excerpt from The Oracle by Abigail Falanga. And I want to go to you real quick, Sarah, because like I said, you work at our pregnancy center here. And I've heard this critique too when it comes to pro-lifers. They use very graphic imagery to underpin their message. And I was on the phone with a friend of mine who was driving, and they said, I hate seeing those abortion protesters out there with their signs. What do you think? Are we being too graphic with that? Are we just being honest? I mean, is there a balance to that sort of thing?
I'm actually very conflicted on the graphic imagery. I prefer not to look at it, honestly. I tell people, like, I am not going to be more pro-life if I look at it. It's just going to make me extraordinarily sad. I took my son to the Pennsylvania March for Life, and when we came up to the graphic images, I told him to look at the ground, because he's 12 and I don't want him to see it. I do think that it can be very powerful, though. If we were seeing the things happening to adults or to puppies or to children outside the womb that we see happen to unborn children, we would almost want the horror to be exposed in order to put an end to it. I do think that it needs to be done with permission. So I'm not a huge fan of like the giant sign on the side of the street, or of kind of like sneaking up on someone and shoving it in their face. But I think that with permission, it can be very useful. Personally, I don't use it at all. We've never used any graphic imagery with clients. We never would. I've never used it in a presentation. I love to show fetal images. I love to show what the baby looks like in the womb. But I don't necessarily feel like we need to show those graphic images. And maybe that, maybe that's a weakness on my part, but that's just kind of where I am.
But no, I don't think it's a weakness. I think it's a preference, because Jess has some graphic imagery in his story, the Conception Conspiracy. He does have some graphic images, but it changed the protagonist's mind when she saw that graphic image. So like you said, it really is a conflicting thing. Some people say we should do it, some people say we shouldn't. Personally, I remember when I saw one, I got sick. Like I literally got sick to my stomach. So, and I said, I can't look at that. I know I'm a horror fan. I know I am, but I'll take an alien monster any day. You know what I mean? Any day, because I know it's fake at the end of the day. I know I can go to the DVD and look at the behind the scenes footage of how they created that effect. But yeah. And so as we get ready to close our show, first of all, I want to thank JL. I want to thank Sarah. I want to thank Jess. I want to thank Chris. And then of course, Jackie, for being with me on the show to highlight this anthology. And Jackie, as you are the publisher of this, tell our listeners where they can buy, and viewers, where they can buy the book, and if it's going to go toward what they're going to do with the proceeds. Are we doing anything with them? Just tell us that information.
Yes, you can pick up the book from Amazon, or you can go to doorwaypublishing.com, and the links are on the website as well. And all the proceeds go to a local pregnancy crisis center. Every single dollar that we make off of those sales go to a pregnancy crisis center. So we don't benefit from it at all. So by buying the book, you're actually supporting the cause, if this is a cause you're passionate about, not to line our pockets or do anything. Like that's one of the things I really wanted to do with this anthology, is I wanted to use it not just to compel people through the stories, but I also wanted to bless those who are like Sarah, who are doing that work.
And I want to,
sorry.
No, I'm good with that. And I'm so glad you mentioned that too, because these type of anthologies, I know that's why writers submit to them, because they want to if one story can help change that person's life, like JL was saying, how fiction is such a powerful vehicle of a message. And some of us write fiction just for enjoyment, but if you can write fiction and tell a story, like I thought was quite powerful with JL's story, and I'm just going to go through all your stories. With JL's stories, he talked about the consequences, you know, looking back and saying, we made this decision in the now, and now what happened later, because when she's having a discussion with her daughter, she's thinking about the decision that she made then and how it affects now. So his story is about consequences. So Sarah's story doesn't have about consequences, about just giving that person a shot, giving them their life, that their life belongs to them. With Jess's story, it's about being lied to. When people lie to you and tell you one thing, and then when they tell you this one thing, you believe it, and then suddenly you find out that it's not what you thought it was. How horrific would that be? And Jackie's story, we didn't get a chance to get to Jackie's story, but in Jackie's story, she talks about how men's voices are silenced in this decision making. It shouldn't be that way. I mean, you had help making the baby, you know, why don't they have, you know, any say so in that? And then of course Chris's story, he uses his story using people that we currently know, understanding what human being is, and taking that and putting it on this topic here. So each of these stories really invigorate you to think, and it should, and my favorite word is titillate your mind to think about these issues. So go ahead and pick up your copy of Life, 15 Stories of Imago Deo, Imago Deo, Imago Deo. So pick up your copy of this, and I know I mutilated that. Pick up your copy of this anthology. You're definitely going to enjoy it. And remember, every dollar goes toward a local pregnancy crisis center that Jackie has picked out. Well, gang, do you have any final words you want to say before we leave? I would love to have our listeners know where we can find you online, but that information will also be in the show description below the video. So JL, we'll start with you.
Sure, it was a pleasure being on the show. Thanks for having me. And I look forward to our upcoming show on my latest book. You can find me at jlpatterson.com, and that's jlpattion.com.
Sarah?
So happy to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me. My pregnancy center is not the one benefiting, but I know that every pregnancy center is doing such great work, and I'm so grateful to be part of this. So if you want to learn more about me and the ministry, you can, and the other things that I've written, you can go to sarahmbowen.com, and that's just my first and last name with my middle initial m.com.
Jess.
So you can find me online at jesshannah.com. And that will list the books and short stories that I've been a part of, as well as links to at least 2 untold podcasts that have been narrated. And just excited to be a part of this anthology, and just looking forward to the results that it brings. And thank you for having me on the show again.
Pastor Chris.
Parker, you're just a blast. That's all I can say. You just make you make me laugh. Just being on this is a pleasure. And you can find me on ChristopherJWeeks.com.
And Jackie, our publisher, go ahead and close us out.
Sorry, close you out in what way?
Well, you know, the Doorway website, things of that nature.
Yes, doorwaypublishing.com is, like I said, where you'll find the book. And as for my own work, you can find that at jackiejilling.com. But at Doorway Publishing, we also have quite a few other offerings. So you might want to check out some of those, because we have a lot of different speculative fiction and even some ministry resources, and lots of interesting blogs. I know JL has contributed and Chris has contributed, and I've written a couple, and some of our other authors. So come check us out, doorwaypublishing.com.
Thank you all for being with me today on the show, and to our listeners and viewers out there, thank you for joining us for this special edition of The Right Stuff. Make sure you pick up your copy of this anthology, available on Amazon.com or wherever books are sold. Know that each of the copies sold goes to our local pregnancy crisis center. So it's not going to the authors. They just want you to enjoy the story. Hopefully think about the issues of the day and be blessed by it. Thank you so much for joining me for this edition of The Right Stuff. I'm the Queen, Parker J, and you have a wonderful, absolutely glorious, blessed day.